The problem with your response, Minister, is that you say that social housing has to look after the most vulnerable. But we know, and has just been outlined, that those who maybe 8, 10, 12 years on the housing list get a small increase in their net income are being taken off the housing list. That makes them very vulnerable, and many of them do end up in homelessness and they don't have any housing supports. So just to repeat that the question needs to be answered: when are you going to publish the review? And it's really not satisfactory to answer us with the cost rental scheme will deliver this and we have another scheme to deliver that. What needs to happen is that people are entitled to go on the social housing list and will remain there until they are housed and not be knocked off it because they get a small increase in their income. And we have dozens of families coming to us to whom this pertains. I grew up in a housing estate that was so-called social housing. We called it corpo housing, and everybody on the street had a job and had an average income. That didn't make us the most vulnerable. It meant that the state had an obligation to house us and we paid rent.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I absolutely understand the concerns from the deputies. Indeed, every week at my clinics I meet very vulnerable people who are concerned in relation to inflation and also the risk in terms of their position on the housing list. And we are committed to ensuring we get the right answer. And as I think fairly outlined in my contribution, that has to be balanced with the amendments that we have made through Housing for All, having a record delivery of social housing this year, as well as other mechanisms in terms of to meet different needs within society. So Minister Ryan, as I said, to be very clear, is reviewing the recommendations. He has a few concerns in relation to some aspects of the recommendations that he's engaging with officials at the moment, and we will, as soon as possible, be making amendments. And obviously those will have to ensure that the most vulnerable are protected, but I can absolutely assure the House that this has been treated with the most urgency in terms of trying to get the right answer, balanced with the other mechanisms the state have, which are at record level, as well as a €4 billion budget through Housing for All into the state for social housing delivery.
Just go one further and argue with you, Minister, that you have a duty to publish that review, having sat on it for 6 months, and the agony that many people are going through, having been knocked off the housing list after years of waiting. This is not right. I mean, when you look at the Housing for All policy, there are various schemes which are really an attempt to reinvent the wheel. What we need is a massive investment in public housing that gives access to those who need it to the housing list, and in the most cruel way to stop, in the most cruel way that you've been doing, knocking people off because their income increases, and sometimes by a very marginal amount, having waited for 10, 12 years on the housing list. This is just not acceptable, and we have, as you've heard, dozens of families, maybe more, throughout the whole Oireachtas coming to us with this problem. It is absolutely heartbreaking, and it doesn't, arguing that Housing for All is going to resolve it, that cost rental is going to resolve it, it doesn't, and it won't. What also impacts on this is that they get no housing supports whatsoever once they're off the list. No HAP, no RAS, no income supports whatsoever to help them be rehoused. And that's why we have working families consistently ending up in homeless accommodation, and it's outrageous. And we need to know when that review is going to be published, instead of having to come here week after week asking the same question.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and I thank both deputies again for their contributions. Obviously, I can assure them that this has been treated with the most urgency within the department. The Minister has been engaging with other departments as well in order to try and finalise an approach that will ensure the most vulnerable are protected in society, and that's our modus operandi in trying to get these regulations right. Obviously, there's 3 bands now right across the 31 local authority network, which obviously need to be reformed, and that's key among us, because we can see meeting constituents in terms of the problems that have been referenced here in terms of those who either have an increase in terms of income and that unfortunately fall off the list and are faced with very difficult circumstances. And we want to protect people who are faced with those decisions and ensure that they have options, and that's why we are balancing it with the record investment that is currently in housing through Housing for All in terms of that huge increase in housing supply into the state. And I can assure everyone that this is being treated with the utmost urgency.